I am now, I think we're good to go in recording the meeting. I'm Liz Adams. I work at CRL Associates with Maria Garcia Berry. She was unable to be here this evening. She has a sinus infection. So I am here to basically just call this meeting to order. I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to turn it over to NDCC to talk about the Globeville Stormwater System Study. So if we can start over at that end with Vern, if you would introduce yourself, and if you're a CAC member, make sure you say that, and if you're from somewhere else, if you could let us know that as well.
Vernon Hill, CAC member, JJJ Properties, Global.
Great.
Nancy Grains-Jones, CAC alternate. Yeah, I know. I had more time, more things after my name. JJJ Properties and Globeville Civic Partners.
Awesome.
Dave Jola, Denver Public Works.
Adrian Brown, I'm a hydrologist working with Denver Civic Partners. Sorry, Globeville Civic Partners.
Great.
Mickey Zeppelin, CAC member and a large riverfront holder along the Platte.
Tom Scharfenberg, I'm an Elyria resident, and I've participated in the North Neighborhoods Democratic Council.
Great.
Jim Shively, I'm president of Denver.
Okay.
Can you say your names again? I'm sorry.
Tom Scharfenberg.
Kim Shively.
And I'm Jennifer Hillas. I'm with the City of Denver. I'm the NWC-CAC Deputy Director on the planning side. So Chris Pacheco might be a familiar name to you. He's on the engineering side and I'm on the planning side.
Great. We'll skip back here.
Fernando Wood, I'm with OB Consulting.
I'm Lisa Zoller with Zoller Consulting, helping with public outreach on Global.
Ray Rupert, Volvo.
Okay.
Commander Ross with Denver Department of Public Health and NWC-CAC.
Excellent.
I'm Mark Robin. I'm with History Colorado. I'm Ray Burgess, Folsom Drive Boulevard, property owner. Michael Sapp, NDCC.
Trisha Ansky at the NWC-CAC.
And I'm Beth Vogelsang. I'm with OB Consulting, and I'm working on this study that we're going to talk about tonight.
Great. And what I might do is grab a microphone for you so that you have, so that everybody can hear and that it gets recorded as well. So I have the recorder sitting here. It usually picks everything up, but.
Liz, I didn't introduce
Oh,
myself.
I'm sorry, AE.
Which is fine because I'm not part of today's process. I have some serious concerns about a variety of things that are going on that we'll discuss in house at CAC. But I'd ask everybody to speak up because I have requested that this be recorded, and Liz is doing that. And I look forward to checking in with some of you guys after the fact. I'll just be standing long enough to just kind of get my phone charged right.
Great. And
So
Dave?
just speak up.
All right.
It's not important to waste time with everybody having time. It's only that one.
Right, exactly. Dave, you want to just introduce yourself? Just introduce yourself, please. Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to grab the microphone for the presentation purposes, and then I'm going to turn it over to whomever from NDCC.
Yeah. Hi, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Trisha Ansky. I'm with the NWC-CAC. I am the portfolio manager for Globeville area, Swansea. And so today we're going to kind of give that high-level overview of the Globeville Stormwater Study, System Study that we're doing in partnership. So it's the NDCC and Public Works that are doing this in partnership. Thank you. So I'm going to have Beth talk about what we've been doing so far with our vision implementation team. We've had a couple meetings with them and a tour. So we're just going to try and bring you up to speed a little bit before our public meeting. And then if you need more in-depth information after today, I think the public meeting is where you really can get it. But there is also a website that we've created for this project. So I'm just going to turn this over to Beth and get it started.
Okay, guys. Well, I just want to take a minute. So this is a joint project between the NDCC and City and County of Denver Public Works. So I want you to meet Dave.
Yeah, I'm, like I said, Dave Jola. I'm a professional engineer with 22 years experience in water resources, floodplain management, flood control, design, and stormwater design. I recently joined Denver Public Works 2 months ago now. So I'm getting up to speed very quickly on this project, and I am the project manager from the Public Works side, from the Denver side on the stormwater system study. So I look forward to working with you all and finding, trying to help find solutions to all the challenges that Globeville faces from a flooding perspective.
I guess one of the things that I would like to start off with is I look around this room, most of the people in this room I've seen at some of the other meetings, and so I think we have a fairly decent grip on the specific problems of the Globeville flooding. I do believe that I'd like to see us spend more time now that we understand this whole situation on how we can affect some remedies to the issues that we have. The last meeting that we had over at the National Guard Armory, okay, we had FEMA there, we had urban drainage was there, and they more or less kind of explained what their process is. And so to move things more forward, what I would like to see personally, and I can't speak for everyone here, is I would like to be able to see what remedies are in the process of being addressed, how we can address our floodplain issue, and in order to do this before urban drainage does their study, and before that goes to FEMA, before we wind up finding ourselves all in a floodplain here, and nothing's been specifically addressed as it pertains to our actual flood problems. In addition to this, in the last meeting, urban drainage did say if we came up with some certain plans of how to address some of these issues, that they would be willing to try to incorporate them into their study, which would also then allow us some time to address some of the flood issues in the Globeville area.
Okay. All right. So, thanks, Mark. Okay. So I want to make a couple clarifications at the start of this meeting. Okay. So we are embarking on what's called the Globeville Stormwater System Study. Okay. And we have not been out to the broader community yet. We haven't had a public meeting, and we haven't shared any of the info that we've been working on to date. What's really important about this is that we have organized a group of stakeholders who have been part of our process so far, and they're called the Vision Implementation Team. And that is the group that has met twice and done a tour of the basin, okay? And we're going to talk about that. But there are a handful of folks who are not part of that committee. And so if you're not, I mean, I think it's just a few, but there's at least 4 or 5 in the room that are not part of that committee. And so I have to back up for just a minute and explain what this study is and why we're doing it. And it has to do with what are the flooding issues and concerns facing the Globeville Basin. So Vern, if you just hold that thought for 1 sec, I want to just explain a couple things to folks. So if you aren't familiar with this study, this orange is our Globeville drainage basin, okay? And that is really our study area. So this is Denver, and that's where we sit. The black line there is the Globeville neighborhood, okay? So when we think of Globeville, that's what we think of. But really, we're talking about the larger drainage basin here because that's relevant to how the water flows, okay? So I just want to point out that we kicked this study off in the beginning of 2018, so just a few months back, and we formed this Vision Implementation Team, which are the series of stakeholders, of which Mickey and Vern and Nancy and others are part of, okay? And so we've been meeting with them and working with them, but we haven't had the chance to come and share this information that we have and listen to part of the community. So we're heading into this, we're about here right now. We're going to have our public meeting to share some of the basic info on May 9th. And Fernando's got some flyers he's going to pass around. We just got this date and information and location and everything nailed down, okay? And after that public meeting, then we've got our stakeholders and our community on board and in the same place, is really when we're going to launch into these investigations, or what are our potential solutions. Okay, so I'm happy to kind of have some conversation here tonight to, if you want to share some ideas, or there's things are floating, we can certainly have some conversation about it. But officially, we're not ready to get into the solutions until we get through our public meeting with the rest of the community, okay? And one of the reasons for that is that normally when we talk about stormwater and drainage issues, we talk about pipes, okay? And this is what everybody knows. But we are trying to really set the stage, sorry, I'm gonna try to use this, with something different. And in this case, we want to do this hand in hand with our community. So not just our stakeholders and our business owners who are on this committee, but the entire community. And we want to search for some answers that are maybe topical, that are part of our neighborhood, part of our environment, maybe that bring multiple benefits to our community, like green space and additional water quality, and give us opportunities for green infrastructure, not just gray. So this is supposed to be a pretty comprehensive approach, and so we have to do it with everybody. So we can't get too far ahead. That's my only thing. These are what the meetings I said we had. We had the VIT kickoff. Then we had a tour. We went out and we toured all around and talked about water flow through the basin and what's happening and what's flooding and why. And then we had our last meeting here, which was more about the river and the context of the river that we have to think about as well for this area. So tonight, I'm willing to sort of morph this into whatever we want it to be, because we just have an hour together, and this is a very informal meeting. But I wanted to highlight that we have the public meeting coming, and we are going to kind of attempt to explain and hear from folks about two issues that affect Globeville. And one is localized flooding, which is stormwater runoff, and the other is the regional river context and the river flooding, okay? So we got a couple additional faces in. Somebody want to say hi? Hey Drew, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, I'm Drew. I think most of you know me. Hi, Jennifer.
And did I see someone else back yet? No, maybe not. Okay. So I know, can I get a show of hands? Do we want to have a little, I'd like to take you through a little bit more of an overview, just even briefly for those that aren't familiar with this at all. Are we okay with that? We've got a handful of folks who don't know anything, right? So the first one I want to deal with, and I will try to do this very quickly, okay? We spent 3 big meetings with our stakeholders going through this, so I'm going to make this very high level. But the biggest issue that we have in Globeville on a more regular basis is from localized flooding, which is part of our stormwater runoff. And when we talk about stormwater runoff, we have to ask ourselves, well, what do we mean by that? It's basically the amount of rain that falls from the sky and rolls along our streets and our impervious surfaces and results in flooding in our community, okay? And we can handle that runoff in 3 different ways: through our streets and our curbs and our gutters, our pipes, if we have a decent pipe system. Sometimes it's too small. In Globeville, it's pretty small. Or our natural channels, okay? And so that's kind of how we think about how do we manage this runoff. And if we go to our map of our basin, this is the topography of our basin. And the high point is up here at Chafee Park, okay? And things all sort of roll to this low point, which is adjacent to the river. And you'll see that the low point is quite broad and encompasses a lot of the actual Globeville neighborhood. And the reason we know that that's important to us is because the alluvial soils, the soils that have been part of our riverbed over time, are focused in and around this entire area. So when we look at that low point, that strip, that's really the point that really was at one point or another part of the river. And if we go back into the historic maps, we see that the river meandered through that entire strip, okay? And so this is a river that kind of wants to carve its way, and we have to sort of work with that. Over time, I'm not going to get into this in detail, but we brought the railroads in. We had quite a bit of initial development taking place, and the town of Argo formed. We had smelters. A lot of you are very familiar with the history in this area. And the reason this is important is because it describes how we built ourselves out and where we ended up. So we have railroads that impact now where water is going. We had a growing industrial base. This is the footprint of I-25 and 70 there, that little sketch. That's the initial location of where the highway interchange would be. Here's Washington, and we've continued to densify. And what that interchange did for us and what that highway system did is that it allowed us to develop these much larger industrial parcels over here with a much bigger footprint, much more impervious surface, and a lot more densification. And so that's a pattern that started to grow through that area. So by 2008, we have, a pretty industrialized area on this side, the remainder of the neighborhood through here, and we built the levee along the river, okay? And that levee is designed to hold the river back from our neighborhood. But what do we get when we combine all of that? So this is our topography, right? Everything wants to roll from the high point down toward the river. And then we add our built environment, which today is all the gray and fairly significant because we've continued to grow over the years. If I can use this again. And then we add the flow of water through this area. And I'm only going to describe this a little because this gets a little tricky. And I have a lot more information on this, and at the public meeting there'll be a lot more detail about why the water goes where it goes and what's happening. But basically it's coming from this high point here, it's finding its way to these rail yards. It's working its way down this rail yard from the north and to the 48th, which is basically a big rail cut, which acts like a chute for water, a big channel essentially, and it kind of deposits itself over in the neighborhood. And from this side, it wants to go toward the lowest point, so it heads this direction, finds its opening underneath the interchange there, and again joins that rail cut and lands into the neighborhood. And from the further part of the south, we actually are collecting water from this entire area. And a lot of you have experienced this flooding at 38th and some different streets down here. And that water actually finds its way back up here, up Lincoln, through the opening, and finds its way north and into the neighborhood and on up from there. And so when we talk about localized flooding through all this area, that is really what folks have been experiencing for the most part. That happens every time it rains or it's a big rain, that pattern is developing. Okay, so that's a brief, little highlight of what we refer to as localized flooding. And then we also have regional river issues that are also compounding the problem in terms of flooding for the Globeville area. So does anyone have any questions about localized or just stormwater runoff or how that's working? So that's one of the big areas we want to tackle as we move into solutions. What can we do to hold that water, channel that water, and to not let that arrive and sit in the Globeville neighborhood? Yeah, Dave, sorry.
Yeah, as far as, we're the bottoms. That's what they've always called it. My grandmother called us the bottoms. We are the lowest, but we're at river level. I mean, from Golden all the way down. It's got to find its way to the river. Now, on Thursday at Stapleton Rec, we're going to have a stakeholder meeting for Platforms Open Space to decide if the retention pond area is going to be a 25-year flood or a 50-year flood, which it'll be a 50 because we've got the size. But that's all I wanted to let you know.
Yeah, that's great. I did hear about that. And so where we're headed, just so that everyone who's listening to this kind of thinks ahead to what is this, where are we going with this study? So we're going to understand the problems that we're facing, that's step one, And then the second part of that is to start to investigate the range of things we can do and utilizing projects that are underway and leveraging those like platform open space to incorporate that detention and to do that even in a more meaningful way. I mean, that's fantastic if we can do that. And so that will help that, that will help this piece here as this comes across. And we'll have a place to basically store a fairly significant amount of water if it's a 50-year storm volume size. Yeah, Mickey?
Well, one of the things we, at the advisory committee, one of the things that we have never discussed is really flooding at the National Western. It seems that it's always immune from that discussion. It seems to me that we need to, at this meeting and for the community, understand why that seems to be immune from this whole discussion or any consideration.
Okay, so we don't need to be immune from it. I mean, we haven't talked about it, you're right. There's a couple pieces to this picture, and one is this side of the fence, right? This is all headed toward the river from this side. Okay, so that's step one, and we have to deal with that. The second part of the picture, and this is, Mickey, what you're really getting at, is what's happening on the other side. So here's our basin, right? And here's the other side, which is the Montclair Basin, okay, for the most part. And that water is coming also to the river. Everyone drains to the river, okay? And this is an interesting quote. This is from 1924, okay? And this was, Denver has been favored by nature with one of the best natural drainage systems we've observed in larger American cities. It lies high and dry on both banks of the South Platte, and essentially all the water rolls to the Platte. And it works just the way it's supposed to work. That's basically what it's saying. And that is true until we built a lot and kind of messed that up a bit. But that is how we're set up. So the thing to keep in mind about the river is not only does the water drain this direction and have no real natural channel on this side and this direction through Globeville Basin, but we're talking about water that's draining through the whole region, in all the tributaries, the creeks, the gulches, and coming into the river that we consider our river passing by our community, but really is everyone's river. And in fact, if you look up here we are, talk about being at the bottom. This water's coming from the entire Front Range, okay? And so when we think about solving the river issue and what's happening, we have to think about how the whole system works. So how does all this river come? What are the roles of our reservoirs and how those work? And then what happens to the river as it goes through here, and how well does it accommodate all that water that's kind of trying to pass through in any given storm? And those storms could occur, in various locations. They don't have to happen right here, but that water is eventually all coming our way, okay? So that's sort of the topographic setup of what's happening. And we can, I don't have those slides in here right now, Mickey, but we can talk about, and maybe we can do this at the May 9th meeting, and I can have some information on that. But we can talk about how does it work on this side, and where does that water roll to. And National Western isn't immune from the picture, but if you look at some of the information that we have, there is a kind of a natural waterway that wants to come in that isn't quite as far north as Natural Western. It's to the south of that. And that's sort of the historic creek bed that used to be there. And we're working in the upper Montclair Basin, and that historic creek bed includes Hale Parkway and Colfax, and then up through City Park and all the way to the river. And that's how the other side of the picture works. So we can bring that, and I can show you some of that on National Western as well. It includes their site too. I don't have that ready to go tonight or pulled up here, but I think it's a great point. And I think what we find is that the volume that you're interested in is coming from those other locations, is not necessarily coming from the National Western site. Although they have runoff, and they have to deal with that in their site redevelopment.
Well, I think Vern can basically talk more about it. But the riverbank on the other side of the National Western gets quite high with not very much water. And it just seems like it would flow both ways. Water is not going to stay on the Globeville side. It's going to, if the river overflows, it's going to go into the National Western side, unless you have a big bank there.
Yeah.
A big bank is going to force it back into the Globeville side, and I have a hard time understanding that. I think
How that's
we
gonna
both
happen.
witnessed the fact that the river, the last flood, the river overflowed, and I think Vern has actually measured what happens when they have just an inch of rain, let alone a major rainstorm.
Yeah.
And now with Cherry Creek and Chatfield letting water in or flowing down, those are all issues that will affect what happens. And I just want to make sure that both National Western and Globeville and the
Yeah.
city are all working together.
I absolutely agree with you. Did you have anything you want to say, Dave, or do you want, I mean, I don't know if you want to. I was going to jump ahead a little to a little bit about the study, just for a minute.
I think real quick, just to answer Mickey's very great question of, are all these different parts working together and all considering the flooding and their impacts to their neighbors and everyone? The answer is yes. We have National Western has their project. I have the Globeville project. The Army Corps of Engineers have their operation plans for the reservoirs. They hit 5,000 CFS during a 100-year event at the gauge. All those things are taken into account in all of our analysis, and we can, as we go through this process that's laying out for us, we'll be more than happy to get down in the weeds in those and share with those. There are no secrets. Those studies are pretty well publicized, and they will be more so and more so, especially whenever you start getting into if we end up down a situation where there's a FEMA designation, there's a full appeal period, and it's open record, and all you got to do is ask. And I've already shared the hydraulic modeling that everybody's using with Adrian to try to share with you guys that we're looking at all the different pieces and how they impact each other. And there are a lot of regulations in place, both federal and local, that don't allow you to adversely impact your neighbors, whether they be downstream, across the river, upstream. And so those are taken into account in all the designs of these projects.
If I might follow on a little from that, the concern that you're hearing from Vern and from Mickey is that these projects are not independent, and there's very much a robbing Peter to pay Paul opportunity here. That is, if you want to keep the water out of, for example, National Western, then the likelihood is that water's going to wind up in Globeville, particularly from a main stem flood coming up the Platte. Alternatively, if we fix the levees to protect Globeville, then that has the potential to exacerbate flooding at National Western. And we're very concerned that will be a reason not to fix Globeville, because of the impact it will have on the National Western. And we know where the power resides, and that makes us nervous.
Okay. So let me just say that all of that is part of our next phase of work, is how the heck do all these things play together, okay? And that's, I understand your concern now, that what it is that you're concerned about. Okay, yeah, go ahead, and then I'll kind of try to explain where we're headed.
And I think, and the point,
One of the points about this is that there's the need for representatives from National Western Center and who's ever doing the planning to be in this process too. And we don't have that. Okay, so here's where I'm going to jump in, because I gotta stand on my other soapbox and say, so here's the deal. We are in first phase. Go back to that timeline. We are in the what the heck are our problems? Let's understand the full range. And let's get that out to the community so everyone's on the same page and everyone knows what's happening. Okay? And I haven't quite got it through the river, so I have to tell a couple folks about the river so that they know as well. But there is our flooding from the local side, our stormwater runoff, and then there's a river issue that has a potential spill location. Okay? So we have two issues we're trying to solve. And what these guys are all talking about deals primarily with the river. It is runoff because the river fills with runoff, but the rising of the river in a major storm is what they're concerned about. But I want to, I'm going to jump ahead here for 1 second. So this is sort of our diagram for going forward, okay? It's very simplistic. It's more complicated than this, but this is us. Okay, and we're over here, and we're going to talk about what we can do in our own neighborhood, drainage-wise, and green infrastructure improvements, and all kinds of things we can work on. But there is also a study called the Urban Waterways, the Army Corps of Engineers study, that is examining some of the changes to the river, restoring the river, maybe bringing the sides back, different options that they're examining that will manage flood waters, but also restore the river habitat, which we can talk about more. There's Washington Street, there's Platt Farm, which Dave already mentioned, and the potential for what might happen there. Heron Pond, not sure yet what role they could play, but we'll explore it. And National Western. Okay, so all of these are players in our next round of conversations, okay? And most importantly, what you guys are getting at is that you now have this new site plan, right? And this site, so now finally we have a set site plan. So that's step one, that's great. And now we know what's happening adjacent to the river. Where are things moving? What's the road going to do? And how much space do we have to work with there to envelop changes along the river? And that informs National Western, who's in their planning efforts, to design that river edge, okay? And so when we move after our public meeting, National Western will be able to join us and talk specifically about what's happening. And the idea behind all of it is that everyone's working together to accommodate the river flow, manage runoff, improve water quality. We'll be working on one side and they'll be working on their side, okay? And all of it is designed, including the Delgany, all of it is designed to improve the situation as it passes through Gloveville, okay? And so we aren't ready to go there yet because we're just in this first phase. We got to get all the community on board and get everybody up to speed. But those are the kinds of conversations we're going to be having after this public meeting.
Beth, can you just go back to the National Western thing and have maybe Dave point out what protects it from flooding? Is there levees in that plan?
No.
If so, where are they?
No, there are no levees. It's with grading, and if anything, it's higher. And if anything, on the overbanks of the Platte, they're providing more capacity for the South Platte River that is actually only going to help the issues with Gloveville, especially at the split. They want a riverfront, right? I mean, they have a lower, it's up to the 10-year event is going to be graded down, and that's where they're going to put their water quality for lesser events, and it's also going to have that secondary effect of helping flooding issues in Gloveville.
By increasing capacity.
Yes.
And that's what,
Excellent.
that's right. That's what and we're not ready because National Western is working, okay, and they're not ready to come and talk about it yet, but we are hoping the timing is going to be great Once we get through our public meeting, we'll be ready to have this discussion with National Western folks and the design team. And I'm very hopeful that it's all going to come together very nicely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we just have to keep going. That's the, like, we just can't solve it like right out the bat. But I wanted to point out a couple really quick items for those of you who are, when we have the public meeting, we have an entire, I'm not going to take you through it tonight, an entire history of the river and development and everything that's happened and how we have been fighting, essentially, and using this river since the earliest days. So this river has been part of our fabric since we developed. We put the railroads right up next to it. We have all kinds of industry along it, and it was a huge part of our progress. But as we grew, we also attempted to contain that river and manage it. And this is a funny, the taming of the treacherous Platte. These are all the historic sightings along the way about how we've tried so many times to really box this thing in and get it under control. And we'll skip ahead to 1965, to the big flood, where then spurred us to develop urban drainage flood control district and put in Chatfield and Bear Creek reservoirs, and eventually by 2008 built the levee. Okay, so it's important for us, not tonight to go through all that history, but to understand that we have this very long-standing battle with this river. And this, by 2017, this is our river. We have managed to make a really nice ditch out of it. And so we've really held it. But the truth of the matter is that upstream by Evans, by just south of Evans, this is what the river wants to be, okay? The river wants to move and flow and be creative and never be in the same place, and we've been running this battle. Yeah.
No. The reason we're having a problem is years of neglect. They've never taken care of things.
Right.
How much money are you going to throw at this project? I mean, on the west side of the river, we know how much you're throwing at Montclair and all that, but how much are you going to throw to the west side to remedy these problems?
Well, that's a good question. Might not have a dollar amount for you yet. I don't know, Dave, if you have any new insight. You got any dollars floating around?
No, not yet.
Okay.
That's the purpose of this study.
Yeah.
To come up with a plan.
So what we want to do through this study is figure out what we need to do. Okay? And part of that may come from the Army Corps to come in and do some really big moves with the river. That would be fantastic. Part of it is going to be on our side. What do we need to do to address this water as it rolls toward the river? And that is going to be our process. So following this public meeting, when we get our educational component of things sort of ironed out, we're going to be ready to dive into those answers and solutions. Okay, and we're going to organize it because they're going to be all over the place. We're going to have all kinds of opportunities and things to talk about, but let's figure out what we need and then let's push to get those funded. And I think the only thing I can say right now is that Public Works and NWC-CAC are leading this effort. They're well aware that some things need to be done. Council is well aware. Albus Brooks has definitely been involved, as well as Councilwoman Kniech, Ortega, and Espinoza. Espinoza has already talked about, hey, maybe some of the answers lie up in my neck of the woods, right? Because they're the high point. So I think those conversations are all coming, and that will be very helpful in answering that funding question.
We can also look at the study to enlarge all the storm sewers, because that's what the neglected thing. I mean, we're way behind. If they would have stepped up and go and said, okay, this would be okay, but now, are you just going to look at building retention?
No. Yeah, we're going to look at all of it. So there have been a number of studies, and Dave can fill you in on those more specifically, but that have looked at storm sewer improvements, okay, pipe infrastructure. And it's quite expensive to do that throughout. But there may be, it is most likely going to be a combination of some pipe improvement that's going to have to happen, combined with some other opportunities, okay? So that detention at at Platt Farm might work really well with a segment of pipe that drains the rest of it or something, right? So it'll be a combined effort to kind of patch these all together and be creative in our approach.
There's already a storm sewer that goes through there.
It's quite small.
Early 60s.
Yeah, just too
It's
small.
never been upgraded ever.
Right.
So, I mean,
Right.
that's right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
and you know, Dave, one of the main reasons we're here is because of a update to the urban drainage master plan for this basin in 2013 recognized, one, that flow from Highlands that Beth had, the arrow coming from kind of outside of the drainage area, that was discovered. Oh, that's more water than we ever thought came to Globeville. Looking at the existing infrastructure, looking at the updates in technology and hydrology and the models we have, wow, this is really undersized. So we have that in place, those studies ready to go. We just got to figure out how we fit all the pieces together, from the local neighborhood solutions to the more regional drainage solutions, and then in combination with the river and all the projects going on. That's kind of
And leveraging as many of the projects that are going on as we can, you know. I mean, Washington is not in design yet. Well, let's see where it comes out of Washington. You know, let's look at all of these opportunities too. And water quality improvements are also part of the big picture too. So, I mean, we have a long ways to go on all these things.
I see that, but okay, over the years, we're coming up on, is Denver going to commit to the money to do the west side? This is what the gentleman was talking about. There's an opportunity to say, oh, we're not going to do that.
Well, so nobody in this room can say right now, you know, that's the deal. But my gut feel is, well, we're doing this study, and we're looking for the answers, and we're looking for a comprehensive system of answers. We're not just going to be like, well, we'll put in one pipe, that'll help you a little. We're looking at everything that's going on together cohesively, and that poses some good opportunities for having some really great answers that then require
And
funding.
the decision makers. Who is the decision maker or maker?
I mean, the normal city process, right? I mean, it's everyone from the council to Public Works to, so part of this study is looking at all these alternatives on, you know, we know what the problems are, we know some of the solutions, and we know the price tag, and we know they're really big. We're still kind of studying and learning exactly what in more detail some of the problems and what the potential solutions are. So we're going to lay them all out on the table, look at all the alternatives, and everybody's going to have their say, and then we're going to rank them, and we're going to prioritize them, and then it's okay. We know that, and I'm just making things up right here,
Yes,
number
right.
one is we got to get the South Platte River to not spill at Rings Court. And what did everybody, including the people in this room, come as the potential solution, and what's the price tag on that? Okay, well, how are we going to get it done? And then we have to go through the process and say, all right, well, where are we in our capital improvement plan? Is there anything there we can do? I mean, there's a lot of options, right? I mean, you guys see what happens with the city. They're going to do whatever they can to try to protect you guys.
Well, that's what, and if you don't believe that, which I'm sure some of you in this room might not right now, that's where we're headed. Okay, that's what the intent of this study is to figure out the right combination of solutions and to make sure we move those forward. That's right. I know, that's why I said that. I understand. And I'm trying really hard with you guys to really, let's be very grounded in our approach. Let's understand what's happening, and it's not only so that we understand it, but so that our council members understand it, so that all the different departments at the city know what we're working toward, so that we don't have planning going on in one part of the community that isn't taking into account the drainage concerns, right? So it's all working toward the same common goal, and I think that's where the most the most, ownership and power come into play.
And I think, I mean, it's, if you guys haven't seen it yet, I'm pretty sure this is probably more transparency than you've ever had in a process like this to date. Have you ever been engaged to this level on city projects and plans?
Well, no, but we've been engaged quite, in a few plans that they just fell apart. Like Washington fell apart years ago on us. You know,
I mean, certainly not in the Platte to Park Hill project. There was no discussion about that. I mean, certainly.
I would say Washington Street plan hasn't fell apart. I mean, there's money in GEO bond for, I mean, we're getting ready to go back out to the public, so I don't think that's anything. Oh, back to 60, oh, that's what you're talking about.
It's a whole different time now.
Yeah, well, we're doing better, David. I think
We've come a long way.
I think the point is that what everyone's trying to make here is that it is a priority. The city understands that there's a lot of risk here, there's a lot of need here. We have a whole city to look after, right? So we've got to start to prioritize, as Dave's explaining. And we might find that there's short-term and long-term things. There might be things that we can do, we'll go and we'll advocate for that money, and we can do things in the short term. We'll also have to think about those long-term things and the higher price amount, the higher dollar amount, and continue to figure out how we leverage funds, how we partner, how we, be very creative on how we start to bring these funds together. But as Beth described, the first thing we have to do is understand what are the existing conditions, what are the issues that we have, what are potential solutions that we can do, and then put the dollar amount there. So that's, months to come. And just have to go through that process. So lessons learned and really taking our time to educate ourselves to ensure that the solutions we're coming up with are community-based and will work to solve the larger issues for a long term. Because you're right, these pipes, we've grown so much and our pipes haven't grown with us. And so we have 2-year systems in some of these areas and our development has exceeded that. So how do we begin to bring everything up to that same level? And that's what this process will do. But we understand that it's a huge priority and there's a need here for sure.
Yeah.
So I would just say, just stick with it and let's just see where we can go. That's really the best answer that we can do right now.
So I have a question. There seems to be a real separation between stormwater and river overflows, whatever. But doesn't the stormwater ultimately end up in the river? I mean, you're saying it goes down 48,
Right.
and at some point it ends up in the river, doesn't it?
It tries to.
And I guess.
So there's a real big difference between when, if a rain event, a flood event happens, the stuff coming from the stormwater, that's coming from the inside, is a completely different animal than what's going to come down that river from what Beth showed, the whole watershed. And the stuff that's going to, maybe happen up in the Continental Divide. Is that working? Okay. It's red light. So there, and we can get into more detail on that. They're not going to happen at the same time, number one. If that Globeville event happens and the stormwater is flooding, that's going to be long gone before the South Platte River comes.
Well, let's before we dive
I guess what I'm trying to understand is it seems like the water is flowing toward the river. And what we're trying to do is really detain that water or capture that water before it gets to the river. Isn't that what I'm hearing?
Or manage it. That's a better word, probably.
Well, what managing?
Because
well, tell me a little bit more about I understand manage, and we've talked all the time here about it going to the river.
Right. So everything, right? We're all on the same page. This all wants to get here one way or another.
Right.
And before we built all this stuff, it just went there. Now it goes to the railroads and then it shoots across, and we've kind of directed it because of all the infrastructure and different things we've built. But nonetheless, it's all heading this direction. Now, in this circumstance, we do have a levee that sits here, and there are locations in that levee where the water can reach the river. But we kind of it kind of sits in here for a while, okay, until it drains into the river. And that is why we're concerned about, that's why the stormwater story is a little different than the big river story, because this is coming from our community, basically, running off and landing, and just happens to be pooling in the bottom, like Dave was saying, right? And so we have to deal with that, and the reason I use the word manage is because maybe we detain it for a while. Maybe we do other things with it to slow it and give it a chance to get to the river without flooding everybody in the process.
So are we saying the levees are a critical part of it not getting to the river? Or I guess I don't understand why the water doesn't get to the river and cause flooding.
Yeah, kind of.
From the stormwater perspective, it's because the pipes can't handle it. It'll it comes down, right outside your door in there. It's coming down the curb, and it should go into an inlet, and if that goes into a big enough pipe, and all those inlets go in that big enough pipe, it's all underground, and it's all going to the river, and you don't even see it, right? What's happening is, it hits the first inlet, starts filling up the pipe, hits the second inlet, and so on and so forth, down the basin. The pipe gets full, and the water can't get in the inlet anymore, and then it starts going down the street, and then it hits the railroad, and then it hits the actual rails and the embankment on the railroad. Then it backs up there, and then it overtops it. Then it goes through that cut. It finds its way overland. So ideally, you get it in the pipe system.
Yeah, but we have a really small pipe system in this area.
Right. So then it still has interior draining within the levee to get it underneath the levee.
But is the levee, I guess my concern is when we're talking about National Western, I guess my vision was that we're getting all the stormwater, ends up in the river. We're basically trying to keep the water from getting into Globeville and into the river. And all of the cost of that really is absorbed by the people in the community, or if not the cost, certainly the damage. And the National Western area is protected by what we do, and are they sharing? I don't ever hear them saying, well, we're sharing the cost, or we're basically assuming some part of that responsibility.
Right. I think I understand what you're saying. You're kind of saying that Globeville not having enough capacity and in the current situation, some of that probably gets to the levee is actually protecting National Western. And why aren't they coming to the table on that? So that water from Globeville, even if the levee wasn't there, if it was just flowing down into the river, wouldn't affect National Western. It just wouldn't be enough to get up the other side of the bank, you know what I mean?
Right.
I hear you, but I guess I'm trying to understand why.
Well, so I didn't bring, so we are going to have a lot more information. I know we only had a short time, and so I didn't bring everything tonight.
Yeah.
And I have so much, it's overwhelming. But there, when we talk about, here we are up here, right? And when Globeville drains into the river, it's just, you guys, it's just this, right? It's not that much. And when Montclair drains, it's more. But the truth of the matter is, this is really what you need to be more concerned about when it comes to the river. And in fact, the fact that it's all draining toward you is probably a much bigger concern than the amount of runoff that is coming from the high point in our Globeville Basin to the river. It's just much smaller in comparison. It's not that we don't want to deal with it, and it's not that it's not causing flooding in our community, but it is not as significant as what's coming up the river.
And the peaks and the timing play into that too.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, the peaks in time. But let's say, from a statistical perspective, the probability of, both of them happening, the perfect flood happening on both of them, even if they're both 100-year events happening at the same exact time, and the Montclair Basin and the Globeville Basin are both getting to the river at the same time, that's still like less than 8,000 CFS. Right now, the models show that the river takes 20,000 CFS, with the exception of Ringsby Court. Remember, this is all going to be downstream to that. So even if they were both coming in, the river, that South Pike could handle it, is the answer.
So,
Beth,
yeah, we might have to table that one.
Without wanting to elongate this discussion, I want to be on record saying I don't agree.
Okay.
I think that that's wrong. The maximum flow that's come out of Chatfield, for example, the 100-year flood, 2,000 cubic feet a second and change. The flood at Globeville in the river, 20,000 cubic feet a second. So the water is not mostly coming from up in the mountains. It's coming from the greater Denver urban area as stormwater, and so it does not arrive at a different time than the local stormwater flood from Globeville in a big storm. And a big storm is a 100-year storm.
Yeah.
For the region.
Okay, so
Adrian,
I know, I understand.
The bottom line here is we need to collectively get this right, because we're not believing, based on careful study of this, what was just said.
Okay, so for tonight, just to continue moving the meeting on, I want to just table that conversation. But what Adrian's referring to, where did my map go? Is I mean, we talk about it because it drains all of this, but what he's referring to is more of the urban area that's draining into, from the metro area. That's what his concern is.
That's 18,000 cubic feet a second of the 20,000 cubic feet a second that we're using for design.
And we can go, I shared with you the hydrology analysis, I shared with you the hydraulics. We can go into that in much more detail down the road. I'm happy to do it in front, or we can have a separate technical
yeah, we can always have a
people,
technical meeting on things
people
too,
that
if everyone's not like, what? And then we can have that meeting too. But for tonight, let's just state that we're in disagreement and we'll just move on from there for tonight, okay? Because timing of a river flow is really tricky business, and it requires a lot of technical background. So I think we'll just kind of let that go for the moment. But I want to just kind of get us, I know we're probably out of time, they're well out of time, but I wanted to just point out, so we've talked about all those things, and I know for some of you tonight this is review because you've heard it before. For others this is new and you're just now getting a kind of a highlight introduction to the study. On May 9th, we're going to have a public meeting at Stapleton Rec Center where we will have a lot more info and there'll be a lot more discussion of both the stormwater runoff side and the river side. So we'll try to bring as much info as we can. We'll have boards and all kinds of things to talk you through things. But this is us. Okay, we're a little behind here, but that's okay. We're building this community understanding and we're headed out to the public May 9th. Then we will start this community-driven investigations, okay? And Fern, this is, I know I kind of couldn't really get into it tonight, but that is where any ideas you have, bring them. This is where we're going to start to have that conversation, okay?
One thing, and more or less kind of closing on this whole issue, is in this public meeting, because people's memories aren't as great as they sometimes need to be. 2015, okay, the storm that we had in 2015, which was affected by a number of different things. We had a solid week of good rain, okay, notwithstanding the fact that we were in the midst of our runoff, and notwithstanding quite a few other influences. And I would like to have a presentation done in this public meeting as what the effects were from that 2015 flood issue. To just, really explain it. The CFMs, everything having to do with that, because what I saw versus what people have presented has been completely different. And I really want to have, and I think the community needs to really have an understanding of something that happened just a couple, 2-3 years ago.
Okay, so what we can do for that, just so there's a perspective on what happened in 2015, is get some of the background data on what the volumes were and what the conditions were. And it's true, it had been raining for days, so everything was soaked, and there were a lot of factors. And we can explain to what happened, but remember, the river did not spill in 2015. It did come close, but it didn't spill. And I didn't show you guys, but this was kind of where, I know I had this up here, but I might not have explained it. This is the levee, right? And when we talk about this spill, it's about right here. Okay, that's the location, that if the river gets high enough, there's a low point here, and the levee picks up here, and this is the location that water wants to spill out, okay?
And isn't that Mickey's property?
Yeah, it's Mickey's property.
See, this is where we need to have it.
No, he knows.
Almost, you got to bring the statistics of the biggest month of rain is June. In 65, the flood was June 15th.
Yes, and it was massive, yes.
And the runoff happened at the same time, so it is a perfect storm.
Yes, and our characteristics with the mountains and everything, that's right. Maybe there is a stronger likelihood of all those things coming together. But right now, that's the existing condition, okay? And up to this point, anyway, since 65, we have not had a spill of the river, even though 15 was very close, right at the, right there. But it did not spill. It did not overtop the levee, and it did not, but the more importantly, it did not spill from this low point, okay? So it doesn't mean it can't.
So, not changing the subject, but during this Montclair Basin and all that.
Yeah.
And you built that and you know this was going to be a problem. Did you guys allocate any money to build the levees? Like where Mickey's at? Is there money set aside for that? I mean, you would think there would have been.
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind is where that comes in. Here is Glowville Landing Park, right? And Glow comes in here. It's north of the spill location. So if that water is really high, like in 2015, and it's coming this way, it's going to spill before it gets to that levee, and it's going to spill before the Glow water is coming in. So it gets complicated. It doesn't mean that building a levee here can't be one of our considerations as we go forward. There's no, but right now, that's the existing condition. And we don't have funds allocated for that right now, yeah.
So Beth, I wanted to ask a question kind of about your attitude or your approach or maybe your philosophy here about how we do this, because this is an arid climate. It's very dry, and we don't have enough water for, and as we grow, we have even less water available. And it seems like what we're trying to do is, it's a dry climate, and then you get these big rains, these spring rains that dump. And what are we doing? We're trying to get rid of the water, dump it in the river as fast as we can. Is there maybe a more sustainable approach where you have smaller based, you use you have much more porous land? It could be irrigation for farms or growing things, a more sustainable approach. It could restore habitats.
Absolutely.
I know it's more expensive, it's more complicated, but we keep saying we need to do it right, but it just seems all we do is we build these giant big channels and culverts to get rid of water and move water as fast as we can when we have that big storm. The rest of the time, we don't have enough water.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, because we did not spend much time on that tonight, but that was sort of one of the first points I was very briefly trying to make, is that this is what we normally do, right? This is what we know. This is what we've done. And, oops, sorry. Come on. And this is what we want to do. And I know this is just representative, and we didn't get into a lot of detail, but what can we do in our community? What green applications can we make to reuse that water, to provide more green and recreational space, to create more amenities, to use impervious? All of those applications can all be part of our conversation going forward. Okay, and that's kind of why we use this community as, you guys should be part of this. You know, tell us, what are you interested in? We worked with a whole bunch of businesses on Colfax where we had a really hard time solving their flood conditions. Not a lot of infrastructure options at this moment. And what can they do individually at their own properties to help alleviate that water? What can we do at a neighborhood scale to build in some additional greenways to manage and retain some of that water and do other things with it? And how can we consider green infrastructure as part of this whole network that we'll be looking at? So you should come out of this with a much bigger cohesive plan that does a lot of those things that you're thinking. And you're part of that plan.
And Drew, I just circulated to a few people, and I'll certainly circulate it to you. There's been a really interesting study done, published by Yale University, of what Philadelphia has done. And they're not messing around. They were confronting I think it was a $9 billion price tag to fix their stormwater systems using the grey infrastructure approach. And what they decided to do was to take on a multi-year program where they would take all, essentially, of the available land in the whole city, and they built 10,000 infiltration, storage detention structures by a combination of public-private partnerships, by incentivizing businesses to do this, by making the stormwater fees dependent upon how much you let out, which we do. And guess what? Totally successful. This is a great thing. Like I say, it's got a couple of videos as to how they did it. And this was a major city activity led by the city, helped by Villanova University, who helped design the various infrastructure things and helped the locals deal with it, produced all kinds of parks. I mean, this is vision. Frankly, we haven't gotten there yet in this town. We tried a couple of times. Mayor Webb instituted this program, and Mayor Hickenlooper carried it forward for a bit, but we ran out of money, so we didn't do it. So the bottom line is, you're exactly right. There are wonderful examples of a totally successful greening of stormwater. And this is in towns that get real stormwater, like a foot. We get what, in 1 hour? 2 inches. I mean, come on. And we need the water. They don't. You know, it's wet out there. It's wet in Portland, who's done pretty much the same. I'll send you this thing, and I'll send it to Michael too, so he can show it to the mayor or someone, and show how real people get stuck into 21st century stormwater control, and it ain't by building pipes.
Thank you. I think we have to insist on something like that, you know. I mean, I
Let's
think
put it on the
if we
ballot.
agree-
So we've got green roofs. Let's put it on the ballot and get green.
That's a good
stormwater.
example. It seems to, we need.
The city does have a green infrastructure initiative. They have a whole group dedicated to getting better at this. I'm not going to claim that, to Adrian's point, Denver is not where a Philadelphia or Portland, one of the more progressive cities that have made more of a commitment to those types of solutions. But Denver does have a program and is looking at. You can look at it on the website. Look at the ultra urban. Green Infrastructure Guidelines is a guidance document that Denver has just recently put together.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is exactly the kind of conversation that we're going to have as we do this. And there is absolutely no reason to think that we can't be successful at this as well, okay? And we have started investigating and developing these concepts around town in various small locations, but this is a very cohesive study, and let's use this as a platform for really moving this concept forward, and we'll figure out what our answers are.
I mean, I would just add that the Green Roof Initiative, I had a lot of problems with that, but I think the one thing that it ought to teach us is we had all of the officials against it, but the people voted for it. So it's just, I think the problem is, I was going to just say, it's our leaders, the decisions they're making and the way they're driving it. I think we want this stuff, but you seem to be, I mean, the people running the city seem to have other missions to do things fast and cheap and on as large a scale as they can. So this is going to take a lot of intensive work, but I think we have to demand that.
Yeah, and I think that's our first column. You guys are part of this, and that's the difference. So let's do it.
But the other thing too, a part of that is bringing in, making sure CSU, who part of their National Western impact is the water center and looking at sustainability and water issues. I mean, that's where they need to be in on that partnership with the creative answers and vision part. They are an integral piece of this.
Absolutely. In fact, I just met with them last week.
So I think at this public meeting, it's important that you talk about collaborators. She's talking about CSU. We're talking about the railroads who are standing on the side, who are a critical issue. We're talking about the other counties who are sending their water, and as usual, Globeville ends up with the muck. I mean that's the story. We're downhill and we end up with it. And you know, does the state or do other counties, are they going to be contributing anything? And there are a lot of players in here, and I think that it's important that this process be inclusive. It not just be the usual federal players who play the
big picture.
Yeah, I mean they're not going to make big changes. At least we haven't seen them do that. But I think we need to make sure that we really have a collaboration that is working both in terms of innovation, but also in terms of money. I mean, I think that the frustration in Globeville is just what I said. We always end up at the end of the line, no matter what, whether it's sidewalks or schools or air, it's always, this is the bottom. And I'm saying part of our push and part of what you need to emphasize is that the city is really going to make this for once a priority and not basically say, I think as you said, well, who's going to get the money? And I'm saying we should get the money.
Right.
We have been last in line. We're getting the water. We're taking Montclair's water. We're taking everybody's muck.
I think
And I think that it's important that that message come out, and this meeting really incentivizes the community to say, let's get a change and let's get partners in this.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. That's great, Nikki. So with that, I don't think I can do any better than that, and let's go forward. So we'll see you May 9th. I'm sending out the flyer to everybody through the CAC and then also to our VIT members, so spread the word. Lisa will be out, and her crew will be out spreading the word through the neighborhood and flyering and all kinds of things, and let's get as many people as we can. And let's make the point that Mickey just made and get everybody up to speed and then march forward after that. So with that, thanks you guys for coming. Sorry to those of you who've heard it, but we're getting there. We're moving in the right direction. Okay, thanks.
Great, thanks everybody. The next regular CAC meeting will be Thursday, April 26th, right here. Thank you.